Greetings. This is the midweek devotional for University United Methodist Church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana for Wednesday, December 22nd, 2021. I'm John Fletcher. I'm a member here at University. Now, maybe you are a regular at University Methodist. Maybe you just watch these midweek devotionals every week, or maybe you've just stumbled upon this video randomly. In any case, welcome. We're really glad that you're watching. So, as I write this, record this, it's Advent, which in many Christian traditions, including our own Methodist tradition, names this sort of lead up time to the coming of Christ, the birth of Jesus. Now, our church's theme for this Advent year, spearheaded by our director of discipleship and formation, is the weary world rejoices. Over the last few weeks, Karen Miliotto, our director, has helped us to name and voice that weariness that often accompanies this season, especially, I have to say, in Christmas of 2021. Karen provided a devotional guide. You can download it from the church's website. And the last few devotionals, and she and other ministers of the church have taken us through the sort of biblical practice of lament. Lament, that is the holy act of telling God that things are not okay, that I have had enough, that I just know things should be better than they actually are. And it might sound surprising, maybe, to think of that kind of expression as something that we Christians do. Isn't it inappropriate, right? Aren't prayers supposed to be submissive or penitent or grateful? And, definitely, I do think all of those things can and should be prayer. But the witness and examples of our ancestors in the faith, those we find in scripture, those we find in our tradition, maybe even those that you know in your own personal life, these ancestors, these models, they show us places where humans get weary and stressed and sad and hurting, and they turn to God and they cry out. In the Bible, Job asks, "Why me, O Lord?" The speaker of the Psalms demands of God, "How long must we suffer?" The prophets that you find are full of expressions of shock and horror at injustice and suffering. How can this be, O God? Mary and Martha in the Gospels tell Jesus flatly, if you had only been here, our brother would not have died. And Jesus himself on the cross yells to the silent heavens, my God, why have you forsaken me?" These questions, these cries, these laments, all of them are prayers. We believe that God invites these expressions just as God inspires praise and thanksgiving and petition, telling God how hurt and confused and sometimes angry we are. That's part of being in relationship to God. After all, how many long-term relationships actually survive without some honest anger and occasional expressions of hurt? I mean, there's a whole book in the Bible, right, called Lamentations. It is beautiful. It's searing. It's kind of hard to read, but you should read it sometime. It's an example of the angry world crying out, a hope-stripped world weeping. And even within this Christmas story, the story that we make so cheerful in the children's pageants, or, that scene where Linus recites from Luke in the Peanuts Christmas special, even there's a lot of hardship. There's a scandal and strain of, a near breakup between Joseph and Mary. There's that no room at the inn. There's the birth in a feeding trough. There's the threat from Herod, the flight to Egypt, the slaughter of the innocents. And as Christians, we believe that this is not God's will, such things. We believe that Jesus weeps with us, that Jesus feels the wounds that we suffer from the shards of a broken world. And yet, Karen reminded us last week in her midweek devotional that Psalms of Lament almost always have a turning point, a sort of but still or and yet. but still I know that you are God. And yet I know you love us, God. It's not that the weariness vanishes, right? It's not that the pain stops. It's that these psalms of lament don't let sadness have the final word. The end of a holy lament is the lamenter defying the finality of their sorrow, refusing pain's invitation to remain forever trapped in and defined by our bleakest moments. It's a defiant rejoicing. It's celebrating a better future in the absence of knowing what that future is or how we will get there. It's us singing carols not to hide our stress or exhaustion. It's our singing to fight through that stress and exhaustion. The weary world rejoices. And we're nearly to the rejoicing part of Advent, right? I'm ready for Christmas. I have to say, friends, it has been a really stressful end to a really stressful year. I'm a professor, and as a lot of your teacher friends could probably tell you, my colleagues and students affirm this fall 2021 has somehow been the most stressful of all of the pandemic semesters. We're all so tired of COVID. We're all so eager to get back to, not even normal, just to like the idea that we can be in the same room together at the same time without worrying so much about a deadly illness. And then there's setback after setback. There was Delta in August. There's Omicron now, this December and January. There is just a lot of weariness, but there is also rejoicing. Y'all, I am not generally a very joyful person, but I just love Christmas. I know. The cool thing is to kind of sneer at Christmas. It's true. I get it, right? The whole season sort of smashes Christianity and consumerism together and then shoves that mixture down everyone's throats, be they Christian or otherwise. If there ever had been a so-called war on Christmas, I think that's kind of a silly idea. But if there had been a kind of war on Christmas, then surely it's hard to conclude anything other than Christmas just won, right? It is inescapable in the US. But I still love it. Christmas was always just a huge part of my childhood. It's one of the few times where my family would go to on vacation, really. And inevitably, we'd always go to my cousin's house in their ranch in rural Oklahoma, near Indianola, Oklahoma, if that gives you an idea. We would go there twice a year, July 4th and Christmas. And those two dates became the sort of twin watermarks of my childhood years. The trip out to Indianola was always long. There's interstates and then highways and then back roads and then finally a long stretch of bumpy, winding gravel roads interrupted now and then by cattle guards that you'd have to bump over. Civilization just kind of drops away and thick scrub forested hills rise on either side of us. And then finally we would get to the ranch house, which I recognize now as pretty rough and hard scrabble, patched and creaking, but at the time, y'all, it was about as close to heaven as I could imagine. I still have my dreams set there so often. My uncle raised cattle on I don't know how many acres of land they had. And closer to the house, my uncle, my aunt, and my cousins, they all had all the familiar hallmarks of, country life, cattle dogs, half feral cats, chickens of every conceivable sort, goats, horses. And then sometimes they would dabble in slightly more exotic fauna. They were, turkeys and geese. They had these four-horned sheep for a while. They had a flock of guinea fowl. They had like albino peacocks. One year they even had an orphaned fawn, and then one year they had baby raccoons. I mean, look, here is a picture of my sister and I one July, and look, yes, those are baby raccoons we are holding, and yes, oh my gosh, we were ridiculously cute. What happened, y'all? It's the ravages of age for me. Anyway, uh, I remember my cousin Andy was 7 years older than my sister and I were, and we just idolized Andy. And Andy would take us on long walks in the woods. He'd point out wildlife we'd miss, and occasionally he would feed us the occasional scary tall tale that we'd be afraid of at night. At Christmas, then, on the ranch, we would get frigid temperatures, sometimes snow. My cousins would put up a huge live evergreen tree. Its top would bend against the low ceiling. My cousins had a fireplace, which I got to say, when I was a kid, that was great. You know, it meant that we could have stockings. Well, socks. We just used socks, but we would hang the socks like on the fireplace, and magically on Christmas morning, they'd be filled with knickknacks that my mother had sort of gotten on our trip up to the ranch. Uh, and the presents. I gotta say, of course, presents are not the most important part of Christmas. They should not be, but I loved presents, y'all, because I loved toys. I loved getting toys. I loved playing with toys. Thank goodness I am over that consumerism now. Anyway, I also loved giving gifts, and I still do. I have to say, I love seeing someone light up when they get just something that's going to bring them joy. And it wasn't always great or comfortable. It was a ranch house that had one bathroom with sort of iffy plumbing. The smells of the ranch weren't always pristine. We had to sleep on hard cots. We learned to check ourselves constantly for ticks and chiggers. Walks in the woods. Occasionally, we're like, "Oh no, don't go there. There's a rattlesnake." Once our uncle took my sister and me coon hunting at night. We broke down 5 miles from the house and walked home in the December night, coyotes howling around us as we shivered. Year to year on that ranch, I saw how brutal life could be. Animals dying and being born. Y'all, if you have never seen roosters fight each other, just know it's kind of this combination of absurd and terrifying. I saw the land year after year slowly being sold off to ever encroaching oil companies. I saw work and poverty wearing down my cousins, my uncle, my aunt. And it's painful now for me to realize how most of that is gone. My mother is gone. Andy died. My uncle is gone. The ranch is mostly overgrown. The place I spent so many happy hours now is just unrecognizable. There is a bit of lament in that nostalgia. And yet all of it, that harshness, the otherness of the ranch, the beauty of it, the joy of family, the pleasure of gift exchange, even the pang of sadness that it all just is gone now. All of that remains part of the template of Christmas that's in my mind and my heart. That love of Christmas, the holiday, sneaks into my own theological outlook as well. All of our sibling denominations in the Christian tradition, each one tends to value a different point of the Christian story. Baptists, for instance, they tend to focus on the cross, right? Good Friday, Christ's sacrifice at Calvary. Other traditions focus on, the resurrection of Christ. That's the central thing for them. Or his eventual second coming, or his life of love and service to those in need. We Methodists, we're a big tent. We Methodists vary, but we tend to sort of like the waiting, the looking forward to Christ's coming at Advent. We delay singing Christmas songs until the event itself, and I have grown, I have to say, to appreciate that sort of season of waiting. It gives me time to reflect on the weariness and the need for lament that makes the rejoicing so sweet. But I have to say, my very favorite part of the Christian tradition is just the incarnation. I love the idea of Emmanuel, God with us, that Christmas celebrates. I mean, I know that historically the notion of a human who is also God isn't unique to Christianity. There's some talk about early Christians appropriating that idea from Roman religions. Much of the time, though, those prior ideas of a God-human combo, those seem to have been crafted to make the human usually a ruler like the Caesar or the Pharaoh, Usually that's to make the ruler look bigger and more important. This may look just like a human, but in fact, they're the divine God Emperor. In Christ, though, we see the opposite. Not a human made to seem more powerful than God, but the creator of the universe, the Lord of the angel armies of heavens, the endless of days, giving up godhood and joining us here in the mortal muck. The larger reality of incarnation, that remains a mystery to me. I can't hope to explain or account for all of it, but part of what I see happening there that I like so much, and this is me sort of just guessing, is I like to think of Jesus's life, Jesus's incarnation as God, learning firsthand what it is to be weary as humans are, to experience how time can seem to stretch out so much when you're in pain, how when you're in trauma, the future seems to close up like the sky on Good Friday, how when you're in a happy moment, those seem to rush by, there and gone, and how change can render all earthly heaven spaces just temporary, so ephemeral. And sometimes it's all too much and you just have to weep. And yet, and still, we celebrate Christmas every year. We build it into the cycle of Earth's orbit and seasonal change, the waxing and waning of the sunlight and the nighttime. It comes and goes, always the same, always changing year after year. And yet, but still. This last year, I celebrated Christmas here in Baton Rouge, isolating with my partner, seeing my family only on Zoom. This year, I get to return to Oklahoma, not to the rural wilderness of Indianola. That is gone from me now. But I return instead to the urban home of my sister and brother-in-law. No raccoons this time, just my sister's dogs. My father and his girlfriend Pat will be there. And I know that someday I'm going to look back even on that as a Christmas past, as a wonderful heaven space that was there and gone. A new weariness will crowd in. But the promise of Advent, realized and renewed each Christmas, is that we rejoice alongside and amidst and against that weariness. God is with us, weeping and rejoicing and everything in between that. That God knows what it is to weep, to be weary, and also knows what it is for humans to rejoice in the midst of, in the middle of sadness and weariness. God is there, past, present, and future. God is here now as Christ is born this week and forever. Blessings to you. Merry Christmas.